Players are on the move. That means we got to be on the move here at the Voice of College Football. So why don't you come along with us? Leanne Herring right next to me, Mark Rogers right here at the Voice of College Football. We appreciate you being here. We're at a different time. That's why it's important for you to subscribe, hit the bell for the notifications to know when we go live. Leanne, how you doing today?
Doing good. Great to be back. It's crazy what we miss, how much the transfer portal moves when we miss a couple of days. So glad to be back with everybody. And of course, Mark here and I are going to bring you some good coverage. We have some commits. Obviously, we'll catch you up on some of the latest commits. Of course, all the rumblings as always that are going on. Even though the transfer portal is officially closed, there's still a lot of leeway that we'll talk about here, kind of the rules, kind of navigate. There's still plenty of portal action going on. Of course, we know that the dead period is fixing to, for those who've already declared for the portal, those we'll see a lot of scheduled visits. The dead period is fixing to be over here in a couple of days. So we're going to see a lot of the guys that we talked a little bit about that are set to make visits. And also there's a lot of teams right now looking to negotiate and not lose some of its star players. So NIL is definitely becoming a factor. And of course, we'll talk about who's on the move and where we're going to go from there. So let's kick it off and get started.
David Greenshield, we see you in the chat. You too, John. Leave those comments and questions there. Anybody else who's jumping on board? And keep in mind, we did some Rose Bowl preview editions here at the Voice of College Football. So be looking out for those posted both here at the main channel and on the Ohio State and Oregon channels. All right, let's get to who's on the move. A guy, Leanne, that we featured from almost day one of the transfer portal cycle because he's an electric player from Raleigh, NC State, 71 catches, ACC freshman of the year 2 years ago. And his team just lost a bowl game to East Carolina, but he's on the move, headed in your direction out toward the SEC.
Yes, he is. Casey Concepcion, like you said, Mark, from day one, he's a name that we talked about, a really high-valued electric wide receiver, has found his home in all places with Mike Elko as an Aggie down in College Station. So this is a huge get in a wide receiver room that's not only loaded, but despite all the playmakers that have been coming in to College Station, not just from the transfer portal, but also from the high school circuit this past, early signing period, Mark, we've seen that Mike Elko has been one of those coaches that isn't trying to overzealous. He still feels like there's a lot that needs to be done. And he feels like maybe this is going to be the time where the Aggies finally get it together. Obviously, the Aggies have been notorious for the strong recruiting classes the last three cycles. Obviously, before Elko, there was Jimbo Fisher, brought in one legendary recruiting classes with some of the guys we actually saw despite the loss in that bowl game, have a lot of action. Noah Thomas, Reuben Owens, a lot of high-profile players making impact. But Mike Elko kind of talked, post-bowl game, that there's still a lot that has to be done down in College Station. And they're really taking the knee for recruiting because, yes, the culture's grown, but what they really had difficulty he kind of mentioned was being able to build a roster that really can be electric and translate to the field. So I think the addition of Casey Concepcion to the wide receiver room is going to be something that really Mike Elko is hoping that this will finally be the Aggies getting over the hump. There's been no argument that plenty of high caliber talent from the high school realms to the transfer portal realms have been, flocking to College Station, but yet, like many teams, high-profile teams that have spent quite a hefty amount through NIL investments to be able to bring and attract these high-caliber players, they just haven't found a way to translate it. We've seen it both in the regular season and obviously these teams in the postseason. So Casey Concepcion, like I said, an electric. I know as much as we talked about Eric Singleton, but I think Casey Concepcion is another high-value player that I think is going to be an instant impact player and bring a lot of veteran leadership to that young, talented Aggie roster.
I love this guy. And as we talked about when he entered the portal, this is a guy that lines up in the backfield. He lines up in the slot. He lines up wide. He can be an H-back guy. They put him in motion all over the place. And here's a guy that caught 53 passes last year after 71 catches the year before and 10 touchdowns. Still carries the ball 41 times as a freshman. So he's a threat out of the backfield and as a pass receiver. All right, we will move it on to Joey Aguilar, quarterback at App State, who had a productive season there in Boone, North Carolina, and got a little loose with the football with 14 interceptions, but still he is headed all the way across the country, Leanne.
He was kind of one of those under the radar quarterbacks. Of course, we talked about how the quarterback position, especially in the portal, has been one of the high ticketed, high demand positions that many teams and many programs are looking for. But it looks to be that he's going to be heading out west, and the UCLA Bruins look to add him, trying to amp up that offense and looking to put him in a strong leadership role. Again, I haven't seen a lot of his tape, but again, another productive player that I think that just really hasn't found his footing, but it looks like he's put in 2 great seasons, obviously, at App State, and we're seeing that a lot of the high value guys, the high versatile kind of quarterbacks, coming from schools like App State, Washington State, some of these less profile teams that we don't talk about, that they're really becoming, they're being the more high demanded players. So I think it's going to be a nice fit to see what he can do at UCLA in a bigger program, in a bigger setting.
Absolutely. And since Dorian Thompson-Robinson lit it up for UCLA during his time there, they've had issues signing a high school quarterback out of the high school ranks who can fill that role. So they've gone the last few years out of the transfer portal. Ethan Garbers this past season, their starting quarterback, and now they go to the Sun Belt Conference and Joey Aguilar. Now we've got a former blue chipper, Jonte Cook, who's been a Texas Longhorn the last couple of years, has had issues getting on the field, staying on the field, and getting targets in Austin. And he's headed out west as well.
He is. So there was a lot of rumblings that he might sign with the Texas school. Of course, he prepped at DeSoto High School. He was a star caliber player. You guys have heard how many times we've mentioned that during the season. We've definitely covered. So there was a lot of rumblings. He was kind of one of those quiet recruitments again, but he is heading to be a Washington Husky. I think this is kind of an interesting choice, but again, we're seeing a lot of high caliber players, especially coming out. He was a high demand player coming out of Texas. From a highly touted high school program in DeSoto. It was just kind of, it seemed like he was going to be a really productive playmaker, but what we've seen time and time again, for whatever reason, they didn't find his fitting. He saw some action, but I think he was looking to be more of a a prime time kind of player, and I think he's going to be hot. He's going to be front and center and do a lot for this Washington room again. When you watch him in high school and what he's done at Texas, I think that he's going to be one of those players that's going to have a lot to unleash. And I think that they're getting a highly skilled player, quickness, great hands, really good when it comes to routes, when it cuts to cutting, as far as when you see him footwork. I always say when I look at wide receivers, anybody who's in the receiving part, I always look at their feet, because you can have a really speedy receiver but not have great feet. And Jonte Cook is one of those guys that he's extremely, extremely gifted when it comes to his footwork. He can change directions like nobody's business. So I think this is such a big win for Washington, and I think he's going to be a dynamic, instant impact player as a Husky.
Leanne, I don't know if there's a school in big time college football over the last 3 or 4 years that has shuffled through more quarterbacks and has been in the center of quarterback talk as much as Auburn. They had 2 more quarterbacks, of course, leave the program this past recruiting cycle. Now we make it 3 with a former blue chipper in Walker White, who had issues competing and winning the job on the Plains, but he is headed to Big 12 country.
Yes, he is going to be heading to Waco and Baylor. That took me for a surprise, but again, Baylor was always been kind of a strong contender as far as in the Big 12. Obviously had its issue this year. We've always talked about David Aranda being one of the brilliant minds when it comes to the defensive side of the ball, but it definitely looked this season that Baylor's looking to up their offense like a lot of players, and I think that bringing the experience of Walker Howard, Walker White, not Walker Howard. I'm thinking Walker Ole Miss. He's a raging Cajun now at QB, but I think that this will be an interesting fit. I think like many QBs, Walker White, like you said, was a talented kid, highly recruited. Ole Miss was going neck and neck with Auburn. I really thought that Ole Miss might take a stab at trying to entice him to be at back in Oxford, since he was highly recruited. by Ole Miss when he was in high school. But again, the quarterback is becoming a very high demand, high value position. And in a lot of situations, we're seeing in places where like Walker White, who kind of was competing, not competing, in the Auburn. These guys want to go where a place where they really have the opportunity not to be the backup guy or to be the competition for the guy in waiting. They're ready to take impact. So I think Baylor's bidding for Walker White to make it his destination, because I have no doubt that Walker White will probably, compete or even be the starting guy down in Waco.
Dave, we see your question there. We'll get to it in just a second. We're going to run down the roll call of moves here in the last couple of days, including Northwestern offensive lineman Josh Thompson, one of the better offensive linemen in the Big Ten, 31 starts at Northwestern, 21 starts, 31 games played, also an all Big Ten selection, who was looking at Tennessee, but he's headed elsewhere in the SEC.
He is heading to the SEC again. I thought Tennessee was going to be a big playmaker. I mean, he's just a really high caliber at Northwestern. He's a really big body, physical. We see that a lot of these SEC, these lines are definitely trying to add power, size. We saw that was a big need and a void for many SEC teams across the board. But it looks like he will be heading to Baton Rouge, and he is going to be an LSU Tiger. So I think this is just another testament of LSU trying to work the portal and trying to create depth and trying to have better protection up front for the quarterback situation that they're trying to improve as well there down in Baton Rouge.
Absolutely. And we stay up front on the offensive line with Ben Chrisman, who originally signed at Ohio State, didn't get on the field for the Buckeyes, had pretty much a similar situation at Kentucky, where mostly played special teams this past season, but he's a former four-star. Ben Chrisman going to Vegas.
He is going. He's going to be University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Again, a lot of people, were probably surprised again, but like you said, when he's been at two high caliber programs like Ohio State, UK, hasn't really had the opportunity to showcase his talents. That's what makes it enticing for a lot of these players that have been in big time conferences, big time programs, to go to a smaller program where they really can up their stock. And I think that this is the case of Ben Chrisman. Like you said, he didn't really have an opportunity at UK or at Ohio State. So I think this is going to be an interesting fit, and I expect another breakout. I think, him going into a smaller environment where he can really shine, I think will be a breakout season for him as well at UNLV.
Well, Leanne, I got to say that the next note that you've got for us here, the only thing I'll say about this is that I'm rather sad, because this means this is the end of the line. We won't be able to talk about Fluff anymore. No. The story's over. The saga's over. He's picked his landing spot, which isn't necessarily good news for you and other Rebels, but your guy Fluff is going from South Alabama to a school in the SEC.
Yes, he is going to stay in the SIP. Like I said, it was a battle between the Rebels and the Bulldogs, but Jeff Lebby and NIL and a lot of other factors was able to edge out, and Fluff is heading to Starkville. Like I said, this is still a prize pick. I'm really excited to see what kind of career he's at, and he's definitely going to be a boost for Jeff Lebby in this struggling offense. Like we talked about, when you have to replace 23 players in your roster, that is not an easy task to do. But as far as being able to earn, especially with a guy we're going to talk about here in a little bit with Kevon Lee, who's former running back for Mississippi State, really didn't have time to see there, and losing some of their guys. I think that this is going to be an excellent replacement. And I can't stress this enough. If you haven't watched this kid's tape, Mississippi State Bulldogs, you need to, because like I said, when you watch him, he is just dynamic. He's just a video-like kind of back. I call him a slippery back. There's nothing he can't do. Very swift, he just, like I said, just watch the film and he's going to intrigue you. And like I said, if he can do that at South Alabama, it's going to be really interesting to see what he can do surrounded by a stronger cast of characters. But again, he's my he is the portal pickup win of the season. And I know Rebels aren't going to like that. I know Rebels wish we would have had him. I would have loved to definitely have him in Oxford. But it's going to be interesting when we have to play Mississippi State next year, and Fluff's going to be on that side of the ball. Just how that run game, we'll see how that pans out. But again, I think this is one of the strongest, if not valued players from the entire portal picks as far as running backs are concerned. I think he's going to be a really breakout, standout player. And I think, like I said, I think that Jeff Levy scored big on this one.
You see 13 receptions out of the backfield for Fluff. You see 13 touchdowns, one of the best marks in the Sun Belt Conference, and 871 yards rushing. And he's a Mississippi State Bulldog. Justice Haynes, of course, much talked about over the last couple of weeks and what his decision would be. And Alabama and Michigan are playing in a bowl game on New Year's Eve. Maybe Mr. Haynes would like to just show up and he could just swap uniforms and then he'd just leave with the maize and blue, I guess, to go north after the game.
That would be a really interesting storyline. Of course, we've seen a lot of opt-outs. We've definitely seen a lot of interesting situations if you saw Miami and Cam Ward. And that's another discussion for another day as far as, opting out. But I mean, yep, he's going to Justice Haynes. I mean, that was a long battle. Obviously, we knew that Ohio State, Ole Miss was trying to knock on that door, had him down for a visit. But unfortunately, again, NIL played a big factor. And at the end of the day, Michigan was able to win this battle. And again, another very productive player, one of the most highly sought out running backs, obviously in the portal cycle. 2 great seasons, solid seasons with, the Alabama Crimson Tide. I think, again, it'll be a good, strong building block for Michigan. And I'm sure TJ over at the Michigan channel has definitely been talking a lot about that. I know this is an exciting. Michigan has done an excellent job on the recruiting trail. Not only from the high school standpoint, but definitely from the portal standpoint, in trying to strengthen, with some key players and big time additions. So again, another great job for Michigan, landing another solid running back in Haynes.
Little sports trivia for you baseball fans. So that made me think of Joel Youngblood. He once played in a doubleheader for both teams in the early 1980s. He played the first game of the doubleheader for the New York Mets. He got traded between games and he just walked across the field and changed uniforms and played the second game for the Montreal Expos. So maybe
that's crazy.
Could do that. Yeah.
Yeah, something. But like I said, it'd make an interesting storyline with the way bowl season's going. And I caught your earlier show. I guess it was the Big 10, Big 12 show when y'all were talking about, the importance of bowl games and all that kind of stuff. And I just think it's very interesting to see the evolution of bowl games, especially, like I said, now with so many opt-outs. We're talking about how players are opting out. We saw how, there's been a lot of debate with should Cam Ward have opted out after he, passed the record and decided, and look how that ended for Miami. I mean, that's got to be tough. But again, it's an interesting time with portal and all that kind of stuff, no doubt.
Absolutely. And just to get everyone updated on what's going on with the portal, obviously, once the regular season's over each year, the portal opens. The portal window shorter this year than it's been in the past. Now there is an extension, even though the portal window has come to an end. We've got all these teams active in the college football playoff. And correct me if I'm wrong, Leanne, they have 5 days, any college football playoff roster players to then declare for the transfer portal. And then it extends, of course, for them.
Yes, exactly. And like today, the last day, obviously, to go in the portal was on the 28th at midnight. 28th at midnight, or was it the 29th? It was one of those days. Sorry, I've been keeping up. But anyway, but remember, that is to follow your paperwork. So we still may see some more names hitting the portal tomorrow because they will process their paperwork. But it takes at least the university itself on the processing side, as far as that paperwork is given 48 hours. So we may still see some more names, but no more can enter. The only ones, like you said, that can enter the portal after for any bowl season, for any team still playing a bowl, obviously they get 5 days after their season is completed. They have 5 days to be able to enter the portal. Also, grad transfers are a unique exception. They can enter the portal anytime. They don't have any type of guidelines. So if you're a grad transfer, you can enter right now, even though it's officially closed. That's an exception. And also, that's a really interesting. So it really kind of navigates stuff. And then also, of course, if there's any shift in coaching changes, obviously that also extends that the team, like we've seen with Washington State. Washington State is one of those examples where obviously coaches moving and whatnot will allow players. I believe that's a longer window. I believe it's 30 days that they're given to be able to enter the portal, and that's a revolving door, kind of ongoing. And Washington State has been one of those teams. I know I saw someone earlier in the chat that we had an update on one of the most sought out OTs. It's probably going to go value. There's not been a lot of really talk yet as far as is more substantial than what we've said. But again, he's going to be a high value, high demand player. I expect that with the window of visits opening up here after this dead period here in a few days, that he will be more on the move. So I expect to see him a lot of the playoff games in the next round for some of these schools that are looking after him.
We see a lot of old standbys there in the chat. We appreciate you being here. Cheryl, Dave, David Greenshield, DeReal MVP, John, and others. We want to let you know that Leanne and I are going to get together on the recruiting and the transfer portal updates on a regular basis. So during this portal window, we've been here just about every day. And when we jumped around, you can blame me. That's my fault. But we're going to lock in on a particular day and time each and every week to do our transfer portal update and recruiting show as well. So we do appreciate you being here. And we got a super chat coming in here from Nick. Bryce Underwood will hang 100 on the burn. Ryan Day. Thank you for that, Nick.
He finally found himself a home. Bryce Underwood, definitely one of the highly touted recruits, finally made a home. Speaking of recruiting, I know we talk a lot about transfer portal, but as we set in a date, of course, for the next 2 weeks, obviously, we'll be talking a little bit of high school recruiting because, of course, some of our big-time playmakers, of course, in their All-America games. Right now, Under Armour All-America is going on, so we'll have some reports and things for some of the top players coming in there, kind of seeing how their experiences, and we'll bring them on all the show. And then next week, obviously, we'll be headed to San Antonio for the Navy All-American. So a lot will be going on. So we'll be able to, as we get into the spring, we'll be able to update you a lot on high school. I know we talked a lot about transfer portal because it never, but a lot of big stuff going on with some of the high school seniors who have made All-American for the Under Armour and Navy All-American. So we'll definitely be on site next week bringing you practices with them. I'm not sure if Bryce Underwood is an Under Armour All-American or he's going to be headed somewhere else. But again, like I said, we'll be bringing you a lot of high-profile players, not just from the SEC, but from all your favorite teams, Ohio State, Michigan, and so forth.
And this is the reason we have Leanne specializing in this role, is that she has a long history of following recruiting, reporting on recruiting, has tons of contacts in the field with players and coaches and relationships and so forth. And she's done an outstanding job online for a long, long time. And we will have her explain her background at some point on another show. But we are so pleased and honored and happy to have Leanne as part of our team because her recruiting connections and, again, her know-how across the recruiting landscape is second to none.
Well, I appreciate you. Thank you for that.
So, Leanne, for this next section that you always put on your text to me, I would love, maybe we should start some type of I don't know. We need some special effects or something, some kind of
rumbling
or
something. Yeah, I know.
These are the rumblings.
We're working out these are the rumblings. We're going to work out some kinks, like I said, as we get into spring season and all that. We'll bring you some exciting. Mark and I have been talking about a lot of exciting stuff, bringing players, coaches, like I said, because recruiting never ends. It's 24/7, and I know a lot of people want to hear about high school recruiting. So, like I said, we're not just an SEC team. Even though you see me on the Ole Miss show. And I've done a lot of work, obviously, with Ole Miss. We're definitely trying to bring you your favorite players from all conferences across the board. So, like I said, leave it in the chat, like, subscribe. If there's players, coaches, or things that you're interested, please let us know. That way, we can tailor the show around you. Because, like I said, we can't have the show without an involved crowd. So we appreciate y'all.
And Nick, I've given your comment a lot of airtime for $1.99. So that's enough of that. Okay, so The rumblings start with the Branch brothers out of USC. You got the two Z's, you got Zachariah and you got Zion, and they play on each side of the ball, and they are a tandem deal.
Again, we hear more about Zachariah. Obviously, he's a touted, but both these guys, wherever they go as brothers, they are a tag team. They are going to be quite the pickup for any team. And of course, we talked about Arizona State. They've taken a visit there, still remaining strong in the hunt. Also, Georgia's been in the talks, but we talked a little bit earlier. Tennessee is a team that's coming in late, not too late to the game, but Tennessee, we're hearing, is becoming a huge presence to try to get both these brothers for a visit down to Knoxville and to bring them down to Rocky Top. I mean, they pulled out all the stops from what we're hearing, including have Nico's father even in the recruiting pitch, and just really trying to tailor made, trying to have the Branch brothers see how they could be an instant impact on both sides of the ball coming to Knoxville. So again, we're hearing that Tennessee is making a very strong push. We haven't heard anything about a visit, but Tennessee definitely is trying to rally up the troops on all sides, any which way they can, to try to get a coveted visit from the Branch brothers. We haven't heard anything, like I said, official, if they will be taking a trip to Rocky Top. But the minute we do, we'll definitely let you know. But that's really, like we said, two of the highest profile players that still remain on the board, and we do believe they'll remain on the board. Maybe heading into the next couple of days, like I said, as the dead period is lifted and some of these players are able to make visits. And don't be surprised if they make some more quiet visits. But again, Arizona State, Georgia are the names that we've definitely been hearing that are still much in the running. But Tennessee is coming on very strong, pulling out stops because they're looking to try to get the Branch brothers onto campus sometime this weekend.
Well, let's stay with Rocky Top because they desperately need wide receivers. Now, everybody wants Zachariah Branch because he's one of the fastest players in the country, but Tennessee has had 6 players leave for the portal, including one of their best wide receivers, Squirrel White. He's gone through the portal. They're also losing a few other guys. They only have 2 scholarship wide receivers set for next season, so they would love to get their hands on Zachariah Branch, and one of the reasons why they only have 2 coming back at this point is that former 5-star Mike Matthews may be leaving. He's possibly on the fence right now.
We haven't, as of Saturday night, we were hearing rumblings that his intention was to, in fact, enter the portal. As of yesterday, he hasn't officially entered the portal. And what we're hearing that the Bulls are trying to renegotiate his NIL, hoping that they can entice him to stay. But again, the wideout room for Tennessee is really suffering right now, and that's what it makes it appealing to not only for a Mike Matthews return, but definitely trying to pull out all the stops to try to get Zachariah and his brother. Obviously, Zion plays on the other side of the ball, but again, I'm talking about a package deal. So right now, former 5-star Mike Matthews, we haven't heard official. Like I said, we did hear rumblings that he's possibly entering the portal, but as of right now, it looks like the Bulls are trying to renegotiate his NIL, hopefully in a way that will entice Matthews to withdraw and not make it to the portal.
We have already talked about a ton of players that are going all the way cross country, places like App State, all the way to UCLA. And we've got another one here coming from the West Coast in Washington State corner, Ethan O'Connor, who might be headed somewhere in the American Conference.
Yeah. So, well, he's going to South Florida, but Miami is actually the one that is making the big rumbling. But I put South Florida because every time I forget USF. But Ethan O'Connor has become, like many of the Washington State players. Obviously, we've seen a mass exodus after obviously the coaching situation in Washington State was unsettled, but now obviously has been settled. And we've seen a lot of high-profile players. I mean, from David Busta, of course. Amalie, the coveted tackle, and now Ethan O'Connor is right up there. We're seeing a lot of the players from Washington State really go up as far as NIL and so forth and being in-demand players. Miami has definitely also looking to pulling out all the stops to try to get Ethan O'Connor, down to South Florida. But we also believe that we're hearing that Ethan O'Connor very much in their camp has interest in Georgia. So that'll be a really interesting battle, considering Miami coming off, obviously, that that tough loss in the was it the Pop Tart? I can't even keep up with the bowls as far as their
Oh, that
names.
was the Pop Tart
I don't.
Bowl. Yes.
It was the Pop Tart Bowl. Yeah, I always remember them for their true names, not always the sponsorship names. But everything is now. But again, yeah, that was a tough loss for Miami, and I know kind of going back to what y'all were saying earlier about the evolutions of bowls matter, and I still believe bowls matter, obviously, because for certain reasons. But I do believe that bowls and playoffs do matter when it comes to recruiting, because sometimes in some situations it can really entice players to come in. Like when you see a lot of teams that have a lot of opt-out players and they're trying to recruit transfer portal players, that often we often see that as a negative light. But in the recruitment world, especially when you got a lot of transfers, that could easily be a selling item for a lot of these transfers, because they're like, look, there's a lot of guys exiting, a lot of star players that are exiting, which means I have an opportunity to negotiate a probably relatively strong NIL, but I also have the ability to have the chance to be a starter. Or maybe, like you said, if they've been in a program with saturated depth, where they've kind of had a wait in their line, it's not those days anymore where kids are willing, unfortunately, to sit and wait their turn, especially at a lot of these schools. Like you said, there's a lot of names that we've talked about, 4 or 5-star players, that have been to multiple programs that just haven't been able to translate or get their opportunity. So we see them, going to smaller schools or programs that have a high turnover of positions available because they're looking to make a start.
Leanne, this is a guy that we've been tracking ever since day one of the transfer portal as well, a very coveted cornerback in Tacario Davis.
Yeah, this is a kid that we've talked about. He's really been quiet. Again, he's no stranger to the portal. We kind of mentioned him a couple of shows ago. We weren't really sure if he was going to decide to leave Arizona because there really hasn't been much. We know that in his previous time that he entered the portal, he did withdraw and he decided to stay with Arizona. And we were kind of hearing the same sentiment, because there really wasn't, there was obviously, the minute he hit the portal, he's a very coveted corner. There was a lot of teams going after him, but it appears that it looks like he might test the waters. We're hearing that later this week he's going to head to Washington. He's going to be making a visit there, and he might also be making a visit to Miami. They're really in consideration, but again, there's been no formal date set for the Canes to host Davis. But right now it looks like Washington seems to be the place where he will be visiting. That he said that is later this week. But again, Miami's also looking to try to get an opportunity with Davis, to pitch their case. But again, no official date. So this will be really interesting to see if Davis in fact make that visit, because as much as we've seen also in a instance like Davis, where we know that he's kind of been notorious to withdraw from the portal, it'll be interesting to see if he does make that visit. But as of now, we see that Washington is the only scheduled visit later this week for Tacario Davis.
Kevon Lee originally signed at Penn State. He's spent the last couple of years at Mississippi State as a former 4-star running back. And you got a list of players here, Leanne, who have just entered the transfer portal. Is that right?
Yeah, they've just entered within the time that we've kind of been on break, that, yesterday or today. Kevon Lee's one of those kids, like you mentioned, he was formerly at Penn State. He's really no stranger to the portal. He hasn't really, he spent 5 college seasons. He did redshirt, so he has 1 year of eligibility, but he hasn't seen a lot of action. He's only played in 4 games so far. He rushed for 1,277 yards, 7 touchdowns. So as far as stats, impressiveness, he doesn't have a lot on paper, but he's definitely, he could be interesting to see where he lands. Schools to watch, I think, will definitely be Florida, where he has ties. Florida is definitely looking to have a solid back. Rutgers could be another interesting place where he lands. Rutgers was one of the first programs that recruited Lee, and that's why I always say that those are when you get back into these things, everything's kind of full circle. And we definitely know that their current running back at Rutgers has exhausted his eligibility, so they're definitely in the market for someone like Lee, who they have a relationship with. While they haven't seen a lot of productivity, they've known him since high school, and he could also be one of those places. What could be enticing again is that he would be a player who would finally get some playing time after making 2 stops. We definitely see he has a little bit of experience, but again, another player that was highly recruited but just hasn't had his opportunity. Other schools to watch, obviously FSU trying to rebuild his room, and they would definitely need some more depth. They don't have a lot of room for depth. Well, they do have a lot of room for depth. Florida is the one who doesn't have a lot of room for depth, but again, it's never a bad it's never a bad instance to definitely add a running back. And again, Lee really hasn't had his opportunity to shine, so it'll be interesting to see. But those are some of the schools that we're hearing early rumblings as far as being on the move that could be a potential home that have previous relationships with Lee.
Rutgers is coming off a second consecutive 7-6 season with a bowl loss against Kansas State a few days ago. Antonio White, though, is not going to stick around for 2025, apparently.
Yeah, he's an interesting player to me. Again, another like I'm going to read a lot of these guys. We see highly touted 4-star guy coming out of Parkview High School in Georgia. He just saw action in one game, and he used his red shirt, so he's going to have 4 years eligibility. That's another enticing thing that we see. He's got a lot of eligibility. Really hasn't another player that we really don't know what he can do, what he's capable of. So it'll be really interesting to see. One school to watch that I think that might be interested in him, who's had a relationship and recruited him out, is obviously Louisville, because he was committed to Louisville prior to committing to Rutgers. So that might be an interesting destination for him. It might kind of be an easy open door. So that was an interesting recruitment that I'm interested to see how it'll evolve. But again, not a lot from Antonio White, another highly touted high school recruit coming out of Parkview in Georgia. But again, I think kind of where I'm going, I wouldn't be surprised if Louisville would be the first potential call to try to see if they can entice him to come back, and come play in the ACC for them.
And Leanne, before we check the 247 Sports transfer portal tracker to see what's the latest there, we've got another prominent player entering the portal from Tulane.
Yeah, 4-star running back Mekhi Hughes. Again, I talked about it, and I said a lot. The running back, position is just something that every team has to have. It's an asset, and we've definitely seen it in this recruiting cycle be high caliber. We've seen, what the top running backs, and Mekhi Hughes is no exception. Now, Ole Miss is going to try, is what we're hearing, is trying to get a push for a visit this weekend. However, it seems like all eyes are going to be out west with Oregon. A lot of relationship, a lot of ties with Oregon. They seem that they are in a great setting to land. The Tulane running back, they have all the right moves. NIL, that's not a question. But I think the biggest factor here, like I said, goes back to relationships. I don't think that it doesn't hurt that his brother Naeem Offord, who's another highly touted recruit, is a Duck commit, and he's the corner there for the Oregon Ducks. So if you haven't looked up his brother, another highly touted recruit. And so it looks like while Ole Miss is going to try to make a push to get their visit, because again, Ole Miss is in the market trying to look for the running back, and they really haven't had their luck to be able to find that guy. They had a lot of opportunities, but again, what have I said? A popular term that we've used for the Ole Miss Rebels, it's been a lot of missed opportunities. And again, they haven't quite found their fit at running back. So a lot of missed opportunities and not being able to ink down Fluff or Justice Haynes, but they're trying to make a push for Mekhi Hughes, but they're going to have to go through the Oregon Ducks. And right now it seems like there's a pretty strong wall that goes in that's going to be blocking those Ole Miss Rebels and Lane Kiffin and Kevin Smith to be able to get their shot. But we shall see. But again, looks like the Oregon Ducks are in a really strong position to land Mekhi Hughes.
These are some numbers that pop right here, folks. Over the last 2 years, Hughes, has been in the top 5 in the nation in rushing at about 1,400 yards per season. There you see the 15 touchdowns on the ground, another 2 through the air with 19 receptions. So one of the most productive, dynamic players in the country is looking for a new home. All right. So before we wrap up with a few other items, Leanne, we've got our buddy Adams checking in on this one. So here we go. We transfer from the transfer portal and recruiting talk to Adam's question about the Ole Miss Rebels. So Leanne, according to Adam, there appears to be a culture problem at Ole Miss. Losses to Kentucky and Florida, unacceptable. What's wrong with the culture?
I don't know if it's necessarily the culture that's the problem. I don't think the culture is the issue. And I'm going to reiterate, what has been said. It's taken a long couple years for Lane Kiffin to build what he's built. And I think this is by far one of the best programs as far as talent, where there was a lot of missed opportunities, like I just said, on the field. And I think a lot of it had to do with not with having the necessary personnel, but not having the depth at certain situations. And I'm going to go back to saying that it had to do a lot with winning those games in the trenches. As much as we have said in the SEC, it's been that old adage, SEC, in the SEC, that defense does win championships, and defense for Ole Miss to keep us in a lot of games this season. But again, I don't think it's necessarily the culture problem is the problem. And I say that because Lane Kiffin, despite his outgoing personality, his troll personality, and a lot of things, he's done a lot of good for this program. And I say culture-wise, he's been able to probably have the least turnover in other coaches as far as having players leave. He's had a lot of players who've had the opportunity to hit the transfer portal, to leave, early to go to the NFL, but he's managed to find a way to keep these guys on his roster. And that's been something. So I don't necessarily think it's a culture problem. I just think it's finally trying to get over that hump, because we've been so close on two different occasions where we've had the best roster, probably that he's calculated the season, and where we haven't had the best roster and we still knock on the door. So I think a lot of this off season, like I said on the last, some of our last shows that we did with Ruby, Mark, and I on the Ole Miss Live, it's not a culture problem. I just think that we have to go in there and continue to find more depth. And I think that begins with that offensive line. I think that we have to go out there, just like we did much on the defenses, overhaul, the defensive front and get stronger there. I really think that was our biggest problem in those losses to Kentucky and into Florida. And in Florida's defense, I know that a lot of people didn't have a lot of faith in DJ Lagway because he's a young kid and he's still got a growing. I was talking with another colleague about looking at his QB grade, and it's not very high, but he's still very young. And I think that I think a lot of people underestimated what Florida could do with DJ Lagway. I've watched DJ Lagway for a very long time, since he was at Willis, and he's just built differently when it comes to his work ethic and leadership. So I think that we kind of didn't expect Florida to play as well as they did, just like we weren't ready for Kentucky. And my defense for Kentucky, I'll say in that, I think that I don't mind. I think that every team should play non-conference. I think it's important. But I think that the edge that Kentucky had over us, and I'll say it, we were not on SEC time. Kentucky had already played two strong SEC opponents, and they were ready. Even if they lost those games, they were ready. Where we had been on a very high because we had been playing so well, but the momentum we were coming in was not against strong SEC opponents, not taking away from the talent of any of those teams that we played during the preseason. You need to play different teams because, again, we've seen it in the playoffs. You have to be able to adapt and adjust. When you get into the playoffs, you're not always going to play the same teams that you play, obviously, within your conference. So you need to be able to adjust those things. So I'm all about playing out-of-conference teams. I just don't believe that we should have played 4 back-to-back non-conference, non-SEC opponents. I felt that didn't help us prepare better for Kentucky. I felt had we maybe had Georgia or Alabama earlier, or even Florida earlier, an SEC team earlier, we would have been on SEC time and better prepared, to face Kentucky again. No excuses. But again, I feel that it's not a culture issue. I just think that there was some things within the depth and play calling, that could have been better. But again, you adapt and adjust and you move on. And I think Lane Kiffin and his staff have done a good job this offseason making that transition, because we can all sit here and say shoulda, woulda, coulda, but that's not going to put us in the playoffs. That's not going to put us. So it's moving forward and looking. And again, Lane Kiffin has done an excellent job this offseason already with the high school recruiting class. I think this is one of the strongest recruiting classes high school wise that Ole Miss has signed in a long time, which shows a great balance of what he's doing on the high school thing. And obviously in the portal, I know a lot of people talk about how Ole Miss doesn't go out there and spend a lot of money or get a lot of high profile players. But I think Lane Kiffin navigates the portal very well as far as, going to the opportunity and, not going to just put all his eggs in one basket. So again, I don't think it's a culture issue. I just think it's, there was a lot of missed opportunities and just things that we have to get better on as far as, and then just, building a different type of roster that has a little bit more depth at some key positions that we always don't think to build depth at, like we would at corner, wide receiver, and in other places.
So Leanne has far more credibility in answering that question than I do, because she's covered Ole Miss for a long time and she knows the program and knows a lot of what's going on campus and so forth. But I'll add my 2 cents. My 2 cents would be that Ole Miss is a better football team than Kentucky, LSU, and Florida. They are decidedly better than Florida. They are somewhat better than LSU, not by much, but they were playing in Death Valley. They were playing Kentucky at a time in the season when, let's understand, teams change throughout the season. They either get better or they get worse. Kentucky's a football team that's won 7 or 8 games every year for the past few seasons, and they looked like that team early in the season. Very close to the Ole Miss game, Kentucky took Georgia to a 13-12 game. They were playing really good football the first 6 or 7 weeks of the season before they faltered. So that was no joke in regards to the Kentucky effort, the Kentucky game. Ole Miss missed a field goal that would have tied the game, sent it into overtime. Ole Miss lost 3 games by 1 play. All of those games were decided by 1 play. No excuses. They lost the games fair and square. Absolutely. And they lost to 3 teams, especially 2 teams that they should have beaten. Now, on the flip side of the Kentucky situation being a much better team at the time that Ole Miss played them than they turned out to be, Florida was a much better team with DJ Lagway having been in play as quarterback for 3 to 4 or 5 games at that point, rather than what Ole Miss would have faced if Florida was on the schedule, let's say in September. Again, no excuses there. They lost the 3 games fair and square. Let's also understand that, to me, a culture problem does not speak to a team that goes out and beats Georgia by 3 touchdowns or goes out and beats South Carolina by 24 points on the road. I just don't think that they would be able to pull together those kind of efforts. I think it speaks to consistency issues. And every time Leanne and I did a post game, the first thing it seemed like we brought up was what you just touched upon, the offensive line. And, we're going to see it in the Rose Bowl on New Year's Day. We'll see. Ohio State probably has the best football team in the country, but they have offensive line issues, and they may not win a national championship because they have offensive line issues. It makes the rest of it roll. I believe that the offensive line is the most important component and unit on a football field. The quarterback's the most important single player, but unit, offensive line for me every day of the week. All right, Leanne. And also we hear this term from time to time when talking about the transfer portal: tampering, people getting blamed for tampering. Oh my goodness. Okay. So what are you hearing here about the latest coach that's being targeted for tampering?
It's probably not the coach that you'd expect. He's not being targeted for tampering, but he is calling out all those coaches. And I think he's probably the most vocal coach that I've heard in the last week or so say, he's ready to call some people out and throw some people under the bus. It's UConn head coach of all coaches out in UConn, Jim Mora. He's really taken a stance saying that there's a lot of coaches who have been tampering with his players and have been illegally recruiting them, not following the rules, and he's just basically ready to call them out. And and I just think that was just a really interesting tidbit, because of course we talked about it on the Ole Miss live show, prior to the holidays. Ruby, and then yourself, obviously, and Ruby had mentioned it before, there was that chatter of Ole Miss, about our tampering and everything. But like I said, I mean, we've kind of all shared our take on it a little bit, but I just feel like in this day and age of NIL, it's really a gray area, because I understand that there's rules and regulations, but a lot of these kids, as much as we want to say that teams are tampering per se, a lot of these kids are reaching out via media, via NIL agents, via their own agents that aren't NIL affiliated, trying to test the water. So, as much as we can say that that it's a program directly, there's also a lot of other players and moving parts and factors that are kind of feeling the water. Because I feel in this day and age, we're kind of seeing it from some of the storylines that we're talking about, how people have not officially entered the portal, but kind of have, put it in somebody's ear, where it's gone to people where we're probably going to transfer. And then all of a sudden these teams are negotiating NIL. So it's just very interesting to see how we look at tampering and but it goes on all the time. Is it right? Not necessarily, but again, the NI world, the recruiting world has its savage elements to it. And it's almost like a Darwinism. It's almost kind of like a survival of the fittest. We know that there's a lot of top players that people are going to go after. And it's not something that comes overnight. I think because the process in the transfer portal, unlike traditional recruiting that we see in high school, obviously builds over years versus, you have X amount of days, slot of windows to make visits, to make decisions. It's going to move a little bit faster. And that line of communication is definitely going to be different. But again, UConn's coach Jim Mora took a very strong stance, saying how many teams were targeting his player or tampering with his players, and he's about ready to call them out. So that'll be interesting to see if he follows through with that, and which teams are looking at these UConn players. I was trying to go through the portal to kind of see which UConn players or which ones that are kind of, and I really didn't. Nobody caught my eye. So I was just kind of interested to see, who these players, these so-called players were, and who these so-called teams, or was he doing something to kind of try to stir up, bring awareness? I do believe we have to bring awareness, but again, in the age of NIL, it's just really tough to define what tampering is like we used to, in this day and age when there's, exchange of money and agents. And again, as much as we want to talk about teams reaching out to players, it's also, I've seen plenty of instances where players, like I said, via agents, via people in their camp, even people that don't really have direct relationship, maybe just, relatives of relatives, they kind of put things in the air. It's just really interesting how the recruiting world works during the transfer portal. You could consider all those things tampering. So it's a very interesting point, but I was really surprised to see the sternness of him. But again, I was trying to figure out which UConn players he was possibly talking about, because I really didn't see any high profile players from UConn. But again, we've seen a lot of great diamonds in the rough, not taking away from what he's doing with his program as far as talent. I just thought it was really interesting, that point that he's bringing up, and just curious to see how far he's going to go with. Is he going to, name some names, or if he's just going to put it out there? So that'll be an interesting storyline to follow as we kind of lift that dead period and all that kind of stuff.
It's Jim Mora playing this year's role of Pat Narduzzi, who's been whining the last couple of years about tampering. So it's Jim Mora this year. Very good.
Yeah.
You can catch Leanne on Twitter. Let's get you set up with that so you can see her Twitter X handle right there on the banner, and you'll be able to keep up with all sorts of good stuff, including Ole Miss football, recruiting on the high school level, transfer portal, Leanne's locks of the week. So we get the leans and we get the locks, and there's another one in there, right?
No, it's just those. I just do the locks and leans and locks. I hadn't been doing it for a while, but I felt like doing it the other day, kind of settling, needed to take. Yeah, so I did that. I did that lock of that over, and it hit. We did all right. It was okay.
There was an exceptional
I didn't see that.
everyone that you missed, because Iowa State and Miami, and I was right on board with that one too. I saw that and I thought Leanne's on to that one. 55 points with those two. Cam Ward's playing.
Oh, I know.
Yeah. They put up 80, whatever it was. I think 42, 41, 83 points.
Yeah.
On
83 points. It was
55. No problem.
Yeah, I was definitely popping in the Pop-Tart Bowl. That was definitely in it. It was one of the more exciting bowls. Like I said, it was really interesting to see. Like, I had a lot of people, get my take, like what we've talked about a little bit about the Cam Ward situation. I don't know if you had a chance to talk about that's just like another slippery slope. I can see it from both ways. I just thought it was really interesting. I just wonder now how Ward feels knowing that they lost by that. I mean, it wasn't like it was a landslide. I can understand if you step out after you break a record and you have an exceptional lead. If you have a comfortable lead, we see it all the time, in situations where you don't have to. I thought it was kind of interesting. I tuned into the game late and I noticed that he was out, and then, I noticed that he wasn't coming back in. I was like, is he injured? I'm seeing this nod. And it was just really interesting because, like I said, Cam Ward is one of those kids that, started playing ball, wasn't anybody highly recruited over here, just up the road in San Antonio at a small Catholic college. Incarnate Word kind of weighed his way up, ended up in Miami, breaking records. So it was just really interesting. Like I said, I can see it from both perspectives. But again, I just think that that's what we're shifting into now. The opt outs. I was trying to see the final number of players that we had opt out over the last bowl games. The last couple of days and stuff. It's really interesting to see, but I think that's just a new dynamic that we're going to have to navigate and shift with.
Absolutely. I did not really address that, but I made a couple comments on Twitter about Cam Ward.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to be overly critical either, but I was kind of in the same boat where, first of all, I hate opt-outs. The season's not over.
Yeah.
You have a scholarship, you have financial obligations, you have obligations to your teammates. You should finish out the season. I do understand, and I'm not saying that if I was a father of a top-notch player that I would not advise him or approve of him opting out to go to the NFL draft, because their priority is their family, is themselves and their family.
Yeah.
So I have no issue there. However, I just wish that the rules would be in play to safeguard the rest of the season and treat the bowl game like the rest of the season. If you want to take this to an extreme, how many teams are, 6-4 after 10 games and they're not playing for anything? Should the players opt out with 2 games left in the season? They're not playing for anything.
Yeah.
So once he decided to play, I was applauding. That's awesome. Cam Ward's going to play in the bowl game, because I did not expect him to play. But then once he hit the sideline when the game's like 31-28, hey,
yeah. And that your backup and your backup it's not like you're putting in a backup that has, that's what I'm saying. It's not like you guys there was a comfortable enough lead, a comfortable enough feeling that your backup guy was going to be able to do it, or like you said, he had to do it. So I thought that was a really interesting take. But again, like you said, you can't knock it. But again, it's just the evolution of now what we're going to see, because, you look at the contract side of, there's at some point, I believe there's going to have to either be you opt in or you opt out, because like you said, there's financial obligations, there's scholarship, and it's going to give people the window, like you said, especially during portal. That's why we always see it during the spring. We see guys early enrollees or decide, they go to school for a little bit. They don't like the way spring turns out for them. They're not going to be the starting guy. And okay, well, let me just go back in, but they've already been able to get some of their NIL. So essentially you paid someone to come on campus and not work out for you. And now they're going to, like you said, and it puts them in that situation. You lose money that you invested, and which is going to happen. You're going to lose money on investment at some point. But again, if it becomes a regular thing, how do you regulate it? Because it's going to be something we see a lot more of, I think.
And coaches who already think that they don't have enough practice time and enough reps for their players just wasted, giving X number of reps, 100 reps to a left tackle who then enters the transfer portal, so they couldn't play the backup left tackle during all those reps in spring practice. So.
Yeah, no, exactly. And then it puts the situation of, you got those players who are loyal to your team and, who sat and they waited their turn, and you essentially take away playing time from them because, you were more highly graded or highly rated coming out, so I always say it's really interesting to see, because we've seen in a lot of cases where, that's why I believe that you have to take stars lightly as far as rankings, especially when you get high school kids or even get transferred, because not every guy's a fit. We've said it here. How many names have we named off, in the last half hour that are former 4-star and 5-stars who've already made it to 2 high-profiled, programs? Ohio State, made it to they've already been in big programs. It's not like they can't handle it, but they haven't really found their footing, so it's just a perfect example. Just because the guy's elite talent-wise or evaluated as a 4-star, 5-star, they don't always pan out.
James Scott brings this to the table. So James, I appreciate you enlightening us on this, because I was aware of this. I just forgot about it when we were talking about Cam Ward, that he was one touchdown pass away from the FBS touchdown passing record. Yeah. So once he set that, he had 3 touchdowns. That was part of the deal too. Yeah. So is Cam Ward playing for touchdown records, or is he playing for his team? But I understand, but okay.
No, I know. That's a debate for another time.
All right, Leanne. And we want to remind everyone that we have made this a regular part of our schedule here at the Voice of College Football. So stay in touch with us. and keep those alerts rolling and those notifications. And we will be here on a regular basis, and we will figure all that out. It's at least going to be a once a week show once the transfer portal has ended, but we will be here more frequently until then for our On the Move transfer portal and recruiting update show. And this doesn't happen without Leanne. So thank her more than me. So thank you, Leanne, for being here for us and providing all the intel.
Well, we appreciate it, guys. Like you said, this will be our probably last show unless we jump on tomorrow in case that we don't have a show tomorrow. Wishing everybody a happy holiday, a great start to the new year. And again, a lot of great content on the Voice of College Football. So make sure you like, subscribe, even if you're not. Plenty of channels for everybody. Like I said, from Mark and I, we hope you have a happy holidays and a great New Year's, and we will talk on the move soon.